is in the house. Everybody, this is Leo Ryan from Innate Strength, a breathing specialist, expert. I'm really excited about this to learn. As I was telling Leo, what was the name of the book Leo was
The Oxygen Advantage you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if anybody's read The Oxygen Advantage, but it was a great book, recommended by one of our podcast guests, Jude O'Reilly, about 6-7 months ago. And I enjoyed talking to Jude. So that's why I think I'm going to really enjoy listening to you, because you sort of come from the same way. So what we're going to do now, Leo, is go straight into it. You can take the screen. I might even go on mute here. So you fire away, and then everybody who's in the house, Leo will do his presentation, and then we will do a Q&A. So if anybody's any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. And if you're on Instagram, do a story, share a post, and we'll reshare it. And yeah, that's it. So Leo, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. All right, let's share the screen and get cracking, because I got loads to talk about when it comes to breathing. It's a topic that I absolutely love, just because of the way my own life has been shaped. So we will jump straight into it. Let me pull this bad boy up so you guys can see it. Ooh, loads of people in that picture, right? All right. Breath training for sports performance. Take a look at this fantastic presentation. Look at all the people that are on that, right? Look at the outside of it. You got everybody from Martina Navratilova, you have Hickson Gracie, Jack Lalanne, you got, who do we have? We have McElroy, Djokovic, Wozniacki, the All Blacks, Ronaldo, we have John Jones. All of these people have been phenomenal and are at the very peak of their sport, is one thing they have in common. And they are also trained in breathing techniques. Now, all the guys around the outside and girls around the outside are, they focus a lot on techniques, and they've done some amazing things and use breathing to benefit them. But there's a big difference between those guys and the guys on the inside of the circle. So we have Will Trowbridge, who is considered the greatest free diver of all time. We have the Czech locomotive, Emil Zatopek, in the middle, who was the only and still is the only person to win gold medal at the 5,000, 10,000 meter and marathon, all in one Olympic Games. Not only that, but the funny story about him is he ran the 5,000, won it, ran the 10,000 and won it. And then he says, here, I'm going to enter the marathon, having never ran a marathon in his life. And he goes up to, I don't know the name of his competitor, but he goes up to the British guy who was, he was known as a hot favorite for the marathon. So Emil, after signing up to the marathon, goes, listen, I couldn't, run alongside you for this and just pace myself. And I was like, yeah, grand, no problem. So after about 15 miles into it, Emil turns around to him and goes, how's the pace? And the British guy turns around and goes, this is quite slow. So Emil picks up the pace and starts setting off. Turns out Emil breaks the world record, wins Olympic gold, having never ran a marathon in his life, and the other guy didn't even finish the race. But and then also in the middle you have Laird Hamilton and Gabby Reese. Gabby is an Olympian and married to Laird. Laird is considered one of the greatest surfers of all time. Amazing group of people. And for me, it's fascinating because, as I said, they all have done phenomenal stuff in their own careers, but they also focus a lot on breathing techniques and breath training. The guys in the middle, in particular, knew how everything was strung together. And that is really rare, because not many people have, either by chances in through experience, developed that awareness of their breath and that ability to train it, or even in terms of the research that's coming out, it's only the last 5 years, possibly 10 years, that the research has started to come behind explaining how breathing techniques merge together. And in that sense, then we can take it as a training plan, almost the same way as weights training was back in the 70s, whereas we didn't really know how to structure weights training programs and how to periodize sports training programs together. But now here we are in 2021, and all that stuff is dialed in. Well, this is why it's so exciting with breath training, because that is the point in history where we're at with it. So today, what I want to give you is an oversight on the earliest form of periodizing breath training, how you can look at your breath as a whole and then train each aspect of it, and how that relates to the rest of your sports performance. So just want to give you an overview of it, and then maybe in the Q&A we can get into some specificities if you want, all right? Woo. All right, here we go. This is a wonderful shot for our tennis people out there, seeing as we are on that platform. I hope you recognize these guys. On the right, on the far side of the net, is Dan Evans, and the left is Sousa. They played in Wimbledon 2019. In that Wimbledon game, I sat down and watched it. I don't watch tennis often, I'll be honest with you. I'm just going to pull this up, so bear with me for a second. So I don't watch tennis often. It's not my main sport, but I sat down and watched this and was absolutely enthralled by it. And the reason why I was enthralled by it was in the first moment or two of watching it. Hopefully you guys can see my YouTube there. Maybe Fabio, if you unmute yourself and just let me know that you can see my YouTube, right?
Yep, I can see it.
Beautiful. So the guys were playing out. For those of you that didn't watch the game, great game of tennis. You had Evans went up, won the first set. Then Sousa came back, won the second, won the third by match play. Now, I was sitting down watching this. I kind of came in after the first set, and my wife was watching it, and I says, "Oh, what's going on?" And she was explaining to me. I says, "All right, that's really cool." So I'm sitting down, I'm getting into it, and I see literally a game in the second set. And within that set, and within that game, I said to my wife, "Okay, let's have a friendly bet here." I says, "I bet you Sousa wins." And she was like, "What? He's down in the first set. He was down at this point in the second set." She was like, "What are you talking about? You don't know anything." She goes, "I'm not betting you any money, but no." She goes, "There's no way that happens." I says, "I'll even give you a better one." I says, "I bet you Evans will lose it on his, and it will be due to his mistake in the final point." And my wife's like, "Oh, all right, fine. Let's watch it." So we watched the match unfold. As I said, Sousa won the second set. He won the third set. And what was really interesting was that Evans was up in every single set. So he went up in the first, second, third, and fourth sets. But he lost the second and third one, right? He then pulls back the fourth set, and it goes into the final set of the match. And what was interesting was, even in the final set, Evans took the lead in the final set, but then lost the lead again. He got broken. And now here he is in the final game. Evans is serving. We're coming up to the final point of the game. And I said to my wife, "Watch this. This is it. Evans loses this game, and he loses it because of a mistake he makes at the very, very end." All right. Oh, man. It still breaks my heart watching that. So you can see that, like, don't get me wrong, there's a whole host of other stuff went into that game, but you could see that was a pretty easy return shot for him, and he duffed it into the net. And my wife's like, "Okay, Leo, what is going on? Why?" It's really simple. I could see within a game at the very start of it, I could see how each player regulated their whole system, how they managed their energy, how they managed their emotions, and then how they were performing their skills and executing their skills throughout even just one game. And in one game, it gave me enough of an insight to then go to predict, and it was a good guess, I'll be honest with you. I don't get them all right, but it was a good guess to say this is how this game is going to unfold. And the reason why that happened, or the reason why I could see it, is because this, for me, is the human performance pyramid. It's a model, and I didn't invent this pyramid. This is just, I've added layers to it, but you'll see it a lot in NLP programming, and you'll see it a lot in a lot of psychology texts, where we look and see that actually breathing is the very, very foundation of the performance model. So breathing ties into conditioning. We all know about fitness and about conditioning. And if you're not ready for a performance, well then when the heat comes on, you're never ever going to be able to perform at top notch. Then you have mindset is the next layer from that. Skill, execution, performance. So the only way you can perform is if you have the skills. Okay, that is essentially what performance is. Is a mastery of your skills and then combining that with tactics. All right. Your mindset is actually dictated by the body a lot of times, and we're going to see that now in a minute. So yes, it's all very well and good doing mindfulness and meditation and working on having an open mindset and taking the right attitude into a sport. I agree with all those things. But when the pressure comes on, when the heat comes on, the question is then how is your mindset? So if you can control the temperature of the heat and how your body reacts to heat, well, then the mind stays pretty fresh and you're able to then use all of that mindset training a lot more effectively. A lot of people think that that's purely down to fitness. And so traditionally we will run people into the ground as a means of conditioning them to fatigue. So we'll run them really hard. We'll get them into the gym lifting weights. We'll get them into the pool doing swimming, and it's very, very intensive work. But the only issue with that is that eventually the joints wear and tear, and technique changes, and you end up developing a lot of injuries over the course of a career. So the one thing that is another layer down from that is your breathing. And breathing is something that can be trained specifically. It's not trained very often, but it can be trained specifically. And when you train what I call the breathing system specifically, it improves your conditioning, it improves the mindset, it improves skill execution, and it improves your performance. So it's like a hot knife through butter. It cuts through every single layer of that performance pyramid, and it adds another dimension without causing extra stress. And that's a big, big, big thing, right? It's also something that I find Western people in particular can do very effectively, whereas I find some forms of meditation, mindfulness, the Western mind, that go get 'em type mindset doesn't fit well with mindfulness and meditation so much because they don't have something to tether to or something to do. So it's a beautiful way of tying those two processes in together. All right, this here is General Patton. He said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. Men in condition do not tire. So he was a World War II hero, one of the greatest generals in the American Army. And this is his quote, which is now used by a lot of sports coaches. And he's right on what he's saying. You know it yourself. When you get tired, your ability to think clearly goes. Your ability to execute basic skills goes. Your ability to have a positive mindset, all of a sudden it disappears and those negative voices just start getting in the way. So I have another cool little video for you here. This guy, let me just pull him up. Let me share this. This guy here, sorry, 1 second now. All right, can we see this new video here? The two guys standing there?
All good, all good.
Oh, good, all good. Okay, so the guy on the right is a trainer called Brandon Payne. He is the personal trainer of Steph Curry, who's considered one of the world's best basketballers of the current era. Amazing trainer when you go into it. This is a great one. Now, it's going to break for ads in the middle, but listen very carefully to what he says from the very first word.
We notice that his breathing pattern is normal and he's not compensating or he's
Okay, so when we
Coaches,
notice
why I don't
when we notice that his breathing pattern is normal and he's not compensating.
I'm going to share with you in this video the three.
He's not holding his breath because that's the first place that we see neuromuscular overload occur.
Whoa. Listen to that careful. When we notice that his mouth isn't open or he's not holding his breath, because that's the first place where we experience neuromuscular overload. Neuromuscular overload is just another fancy way of saying fatigue. In other words, what these guys are looking at a very, very high level, at the highest level of NBA basketball, is when a person starts to hold their breath or their breathing starts to change, that's the first sign of neuromuscular overload. Once the neuromuscular system, in other words, once you start to fatigue in your body, then you can't execute skill as well. Once skill has gone out the door, the performance goes with it. So again, if we can look at breathing as something to train and something to improve on, well, then we're able to train our conditioning, we're able to train our skills under fatigue, and we're able to last longer at a higher level within our sport. And that essentially is what all conditioning is about from a fitness and from a trainer's point of view, right?
Yeah.
Cool, let's move along. So when we talk about breathing for performance, it's really important to know that health is the bottom of the pyramid. And this is where a book like The Oxygen Advantage is fantastic, is because they're talking about training the fundamentals of your breath. I can't tell you the amount of elite athletes and professional athletes that I've worked with whose breathing patterns are awful. These guys and girls are some of the top conditioned athletes in the world, and still their underlying breathing patterns are awful. Now, the reasons are very, very many, and I'll touch on them later on, but essentially everything in life impacts your breath. You're talking from anything that happens to you emotionally, to general stress, to physical stress, to lack of sleeping. All of that impacts your breath. And once the breath changes and becomes adapted, then it starts working against you. So no matter who you are, I always say to them, look, you still have to ingrain the very foundations and fundamentals of the breath, and you may even get more benefits out of the fundamentals than you will out of any of the fancy techniques that you'll see later on. Performance is built on health, particularly when it comes to breathing, and even more so I find than physical movement, right? Sometimes when it comes to performing at the elite level, you can get away with compensatory patterns a lot of the time, but with the breath, you just can't do that. You can certainly play with it, and once you consciously know what you're doing, but if your breath is adapted, in other words, if you're holding, or if you're out of breath, I can't control it, and don't know how to pull it back, well, then it's going to impact your performance. So when it comes to breathing for health, it's a simple triangle that needs to be trained. At the bottom and at the very fundamental of the triangle is your mechanics. You need to check and make sure that your breathing mechanics are free and you're able to breathe well. After that, you got to start to develop your ability to breathe with your nose. There's very few people who can't breathe with their nose. But yes, there is a lot of athletes who can't breathe with their nose at the very peak of their conditioning. I agree with that. Having said that, to embed nasal breathing as a foundation in your breathing system is really, really important. Why? Because you'll dehydrate less, you'll use a diaphragm more, and you will get better oxygen into your cells where you need them. There's 3 very simple reasons why you need to develop nasal breathing as a baseline. The third point then of breath training for health is breath work. Now, when you look at on the internet, when you go diving down the rabbit hole of breathing, you'll see breath work all over the place, and the term used. That term comes a lot from therapeutic uses of breath work for psychiatric disorders. So I'm talking the likes of holotropic breathing, rebirthing, these methods, even the Wim Hof method I will put into the breath work side of things. So all of these breathing techniques and methods are designed to work with the mind in particular. And so I use that as a separate point on the scale where you have to train that if you want to train the whole of your breathing system for health. So that it means we got to use our mechanics freely and easily. We got to be able to develop our nasal, our ability to breathe through our nose. And then we've got to be able to use breath work to go into the mind and to find peace in the body through the mental process. That one would require a whole other webinar, so I'm not going to go too deep in that one today, just so you know. I do want to stop here and just take a moment just to give you a little bit of a breath pattern analysis for yourselves, okay? And to give you an idea of why mechanics is so important. So if you sit tall, you'll have access to your lungs very easy. And if you place a hand on your belly, hand on your chest. And I want you to take full breaths in. So a full breath in through the nose. And then let go of the exhale. Full breath in through the nose. And let go of the exhale. Continue to do a few breaths of those as I talk you through this assessment that you're going to do on yourself. As you breathe in through the nose, is it easy to breathe in through the nose? Yes or no? Next question. Yeah. As you breathe in, does your belly hand rise?
Yeah.
And then as you breathe in, does the chest hand then rise? So is there like a wave, belly, chest? Now you're not pushing out the belly, but simply does it rise? Then does the chest rise? And then can you just let go of the exhale?
Yeah.
So pay attention. Breathe in a full breath. Is there a slight pause at the top? Is there a bit of a constriction? Are you holding the throat muscles as you exhale, or can you just let it go? Because a lot of stress in our body and tension in our body is held in the breath, and you will see that physically in your exhale. If the person is holding their breath, remember to what Brandon Payne said, the person is holding their breath, it's a sign of neuromuscular overload. In other words, if you're holding your breath or controlling your exhale when you're at rest, then that means when you're put under pressure, your stress levels are already high and you won't be able to cope with the additional pressure at the end. So it's really, really important that you can take a full breath in and then let it go. For some people, their belly mightn't rise very well when they're breathing like this. For others, their chest might be a little bit stuck and not move at all. These are all just patterns that in your breathing, that the muscle tissues are really tight. You can't get access to them, and no amount of belly breathing is going to resolve that. That's a technique I used 6-7 years ago when I was a younger coach and I didn't understand that diaphragmatic breathing should just happen naturally. Once some muscles are moving well, once you can nasal breathe, you shouldn't have to worry about moving your belly or your chest. It should just automatically happen. But this is why we train the fundamentals and why it's important to restore these things so that when it comes to performance, you can then use them. Yeah? It's like that old martial arts saying is that you should be nice and loose and relaxed until the moment of impact, and then boom, everything tightens up at the last moment. But if you're walking around stiff as a board, controlling your exhale, holding your breath, unable to breathe into the different parts of your body, well then when it comes to performance time, you won't be able to use those aspects quite as well. When we do get to the performance level then, there is so many parts to breathing that can add to your performance. You can enhance your warm-up and cut down your warm-up time. If you've ever heard of the second wind, which I'm sure you have, where for the first 10 or 15 minutes, some players are like, and it doesn't matter how conditioned they are, about 10, 15 minutes into a match, they're completely out of breath. And you'll see it in them, right? This happens particularly in cold weather. And the reason why this happens is because the respiratory system, their breathing, isn't as well warmed up as their cardiovascular and neuromuscular systems. In other words, they started to warm up at level 5 when they need to take it back to level 1 and warm up much more slowly. When you warm up more progressively, there is no need for a second wind. It does not happen in my experience as a coach. It just disappears. The person is able to start at a higher pace and perform at a higher pace for the rest of their match. So then we also have breathing during training is different from breathing in competition. because of how we can play with our energy systems and work them. So you gotta think about, okay, how do I want to breathe, or what's the goal of my training session? And now how do I adapt my breathing to get the most out of that? Let me give you an example. If I want to improve my aerobic capacity, my ability to use oxygen, I will always be nasal breathing. Always, always, always. There is no scientific paper on that yet. What happened was in 2017, I just made up a challenge for myself and decided I was going to run a marathon. Hadn't ran in 7 years, no endurance training. And I did a VO2 max test. And in the VO2 max test, I went to this guy, Sean Canan, who's a fantastic tester. And I said, look, in the middle of this test, I'm going to give you a thumbs up. Let me know when it happens. So we ran the VO2 max test, and he sits down and he gives me my data, and he says, I said, so where was the anaerobic threshold, which was the point where you use more lactic acid as a fuel source and start changing over your systems. It's a point in your energy system where you begin to tire and fatigue. And he goes, oh, here you are here. He says, okay, that's interesting. I says, where's that thumbs up that I gave you? And he says, that's really interesting. He says, there it is there, 10 seconds away from the AT. And I went, oh, that's interesting. He says, why is that? I says, that was the point where I changed from all nasal breathing, in and out of my nose, to nose-mouth breathing, in through my nose, out of my mouth. And he says, why is that interesting? I said, because now I have a way how to pace myself for the marathon. If I'm aerobic, I know I'm using oxygen and I can get to the end of this race. It's just a matter of making sure that my joints stay together, right? Now, I'm N equals 1. I'm only one person. So after that Dublin Marathon, I went away, took 10 athletes who had been training for the previous 3 years. I paid for them and put them through the tests, and they found the exact same thing. In the last year, we have the first paper to come out to show that there is a correlation between the anaerobic threshold and the vent that you use to breathe. Okay, so you can now start managing your energy systems in play without any technology, just by learning how to breathe better and how to tap into your breathing. You can learn where that fatigue factor is in your own body. Breathing then, of course, is amazing for recovery, and that's where its real benefits are, is it will really help you to recover, both in between points, in between sets, and in between training sessions. So it will help you to recover acutely, and it will help you to recover chronically from a tough session and a tough training load. If your breathing is anyway adapted, all those processes get slowed down. You then have breathing for pre-competition. So I will bring in protocols for pre-competition different to training, because in competition I want to perform at my very, very best. I want athletes performing at their peak levels. But in training, I don't necessarily want to max out every system in my athletes' bodies in every single training session. Sometimes I might want them to feel like they're tired and under fatigue, but I want to control the stress level on them. So that's where pre-competition breathing might be a little bit different to in-training breathing. And then, of course, intra-competition is about that acute recovery, so that recovery between points and sets. You then have one more aspect of breath training, which is advanced breathing protocols. The benefits of these, and it is what it is in the picture, is it is a lot of breath holding techniques or advanced breath training protocols to build on top of your sport. So that is where the difference is, and this is where the kind of the sports performance end is really knowing how to use your breathing system and then training the foundations very well. And then for some sports, advanced training protocols are absolutely necessary. For example, if you're a free diver, your whole training is based around breathing and breath holding. Whereas if you are a marathon runner, it might be a little bit different, and a tennis player will be different again. And then you just have to fit your breath training and look for efficient ways how to fit that breath training in with all the rest of your training. And that's really where the smart coach comes in, where we're able to then go, okay, there's no point in being amazing at breathing and rubbish at your sport. At the end of the day, the point of doing this is to make you better at your sport. So a lot of people, a lot of athletes I see, because there's so much out there on the internet at the moment, is they're getting carried away with focusing solely on breathing. But for me, most athletes, once they train the fundamentals of their breath, that will do them perfectly. And then they might top up on their breath training, in 1 or 2 phases per year. So there are tons of benefits to breath training. Here's some of my top favorites for sports people. Your better use of your own energy. You're more in tune with your own body. You can read competitors better as well. I'll give you a very good one is, I remember, how are we doing time-wise? We're just about up. That's okay, Fabio, I'm just done. You can read, I'll leave that story for another day. How's that?
You can shoot it, you can fire away.
We can fire away? Okay.
Yeah.
So I remember I'm a recreational judoka, so judo's my sport. And I'm here based in Ireland, and we had these 2 guys come over to our judo club in 2016. And they were small guys, 66 kilos, so quite light. I'm 73, by the way, so I'm the next category up, so I'm not exactly heavy or tall myself. And but they came on, they're Eastern European, they came on wearing white belts, and they get on the mats, and you could see they could move really well. So we're training, and our club is pretty decent. We've got a few really good guys, and in particular, we have one guy, Maury, who's a ex-Iranian Special Forces 4th Dan judo player, and he's a world master, so he knows his judo. Not only that, but he's 120 kilos. He's twice their body weight, literally. So the guys get on the mat and they're doing some sparring, which is usual in judo, and all of a sudden, boom, I see Maury go head over heels and is thrown on the flat of his back. I'm like, whoa, who are these boys? Turns out they were brothers. They were number 1 and 2 in Moldova and went to the 2015 games in Baku. And they just retired and came to Ireland and were keeping up their judo. But they were incredible players. As we were doing our training, they used to love playing with me, because when they were doing the randori with me, I was a similar weight. And of course, they had the skill and they had the technique and they had the efficiency, and they were a much better player than I ever was. But what I used to do is just watch them. I used to just play with them and stay in there and keep going in the training sessions. And I would reach a point where I would see then a breakdown in their breathing. I would see them start to literally hold their breath and recover that a little bit more. And because that side of me was so developed, that's when I used to put the pressure on, and I was able to throw them every single training session. I was able to throw them a handful of times solely because I could play on their weaknesses and on my strengths. And that's the type of gamesmanship that I'll bring into the athletes that I train as well. Is not only can you improve your own system, but you can watch and see how other competitors are and how they regulate their energy through their breathing. So all the other cool stuff that's there for the breath training, you have enhanced recovery. I've seen in tests up to 40% improved recovery rates. So 40% quicker, better focus and concentration. That's science-based. Same fitness with less stress. So we can get athletes just as fit and conditioned for their sport, but without putting as much stress on the body. And that's phenomenal, particularly for top-level athletes. The reason why all that is because breathing is at the center of every single system in your body. It regulates energy through carbon dioxide is a big thing. It has a direct impact on your nervous system and on your brain. In fact, breathing is tied to fear, focus, and concentration in the brain. They're directly linked. Look at that picture of the heart down there in the bottom left. Look what it's sitting on. It doesn't even sit on your lungs. Your heart, or on your diaphragm, your heart sits into the diaphragm. So if you're breathing fast, that's going to increase your heart rate a lot more. And it's also then going to impact, because a lot of people understand the impact, a role of heart rate and recovery. But your heart rate is dictated by your breathing. And then finally, the bottom right is your neuromuscular system. Muscles don't work on their own. Your body doesn't know what a quadricep is. That's a human modern terminology on the muscle. It knows chains of muscles and links of muscles. And your diaphragm is a muscle that sits horizontal in the body. And so every single chain of the body crosses through the diaphragm, which means the diaphragm actually has a big role to play in recurring back pain, recurring hamstring injuries, and unstable ankles. And then up the chain, it has a big role to play on shoulder injuries too in research. So it's really, really central. That's a protocol I have for a warm-up, which I'm going to give to Fabio and let you guys see. I just put it up there just to have, but I'll share that with you, Fabio, so that people can begin to play with this and enjoy this. And finally, these are just 2 programs that I run. They're pretty much, the one on the right is the only one in the world at the moment where it takes you through phases of breath training over 16 weeks. So it's self-directed through an app, but there's loads of coaching videos, loads of PDF documents and support documents, and then there's a nice support network with it as well. And then the Empower breath work is about using breathing to access states of the mind and improve states of the mind and improve stress from that perspective. And they are my links if anybody would like to see them. How do we do time-wise, Fabio? We okay?
Leo, that was perfect. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if I've appeared. Have I appeared back up here? No, maybe I haven't. But that was great. Very interesting. I had a little interest, not too much about it. So thank you very much. I was going to ask you, where can people find out more? Where can they get started? But there's a couple of questions there. Before we get into them, I have just 2 questions for you. One is,
yes,
how much time, does somebody have to spend with this every day?
10 minutes. In an athlete, I find that athletes usually, it takes them, I would say at the low end, you're looking at 8 weeks to 12 weeks. I've seen 1 or 2 do better, but they had prior history with it where they will cut their time down to about a 6-week period of learning. Developing their breathing system. I call it a breathing system because it's your whole biology is focused on improving that one part of you. So you're talking at 6 to 12 weeks. That's why that program that I put up is a 16-week program to give people time in the program to develop. What I then do after that, by the way, I just haven't launched it, there's a sports performance one, which will talk about the advanced techniques and then how to apply breathing to your sport. And that's, but yeah, you're looking at 6 to 12 weeks.
Nice. And my last question before we break into these other questions is, what's this I heard about people sleeping, taping up their mouth?
Well, remember that marathon that I told you about there?
Yeah.
Because of the testing, I actually taped my mouth for the marathon.
Wow.
Yeah, because if you think about it, it's a sport or it's a pursuit where I wanted to be all aerobic. I wasn't at performance level where I'm really pushing boundaries, but for a recreational person, I wanted to make sure that I was all aerobic. So the best way to do that, I knew I had to be breathing through my nose. So it made sense for me to tape on my mouth.
And tell me, what time did you get? Can you tell us?
Do you know what? I actually don't know. I got through it. I know it was over the 5-hour mark. I got through it. I didn't set anything on fire. I was no Emil Zatopek who created a world record without having ran a marathon in his life. Yeah. It was enough to get the job done and have some fun doing it.
Nice. Okay. Well, look, let's go straight into these questions here. We try and get through as many as we can. We're going to start with, from Alex here, your opinion about Wim Hof method. And he says, nice webinar. Thanks.
Nice. I'm actually a Wim Hof instructor. I'm an Oxygen Advantage Master instructor. I've got a few other stuff going on. Wim Hof method is amazing. Now you got to remember, the Wim Hof method is a breathing technique. It's trained mindset, and it's cold exposure. So any research or data out there in the Wim Hof method takes those 3 powerful pillars together, not any one on their own. The technique is a fantastic technique. I will say, if nobody's done it before, it can bring up a lot of emotions in people in particular. So I just personally don't teach it online, and I like people to ease themselves into the technique. Is it good for sports performance? It is. You can do it up to 6 hours before your sport, and you'll have the physiological effects on your system, which is great. So you don't have to like do it just 10 minutes before. It can be any time up to 6 hours before, is what the research would say. And the last thing I would say about it is it's not about how long you hold your breath in the Wim Hof method. It's not about how hard and how much you go. Literally, that 3 rounds, as I say they, but I prescribe it too in it, is plenty for you. It's not the more the better in it.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Next one is from Alex Grant. This probably applies to everybody in here. Is there specific breathing patterns to combat getting tight and nervous in the big moments?
Yes. So remember I taught, well, is there a specific breathing pattern? So pattern is the way you breathe. So this is why I took you to that little assessment. All of that is a constriction. For people, your muscles are tied together. They're like sausages, right? So you got the meaty part of the sausage, and then you have the skin of the sausage, and the skin links together. Yeah. So your muscles are tied together through this stuff called fascia, which is like a skin on the inside. It wraps around all the muscles into tendons. It is tendons and into your bones. One line of fascia runs actually from your tongue through your throat muscles down into the diaphragm and down into your pelvic floor. That's one chain of fascia. So if you're constricting here, then it pulls tightness through the whole system. Okay, as you pull, and if you're tight and you're just walking around when you're supposed to be at rest, imagine how tight that whole system gets when you're then trying to execute in performance levels. So when it comes to breathing, the best thing that it does is promote relaxation. And when you do breathing techniques and training, the whole purpose of it is to embed more and more relaxation into your body under greater loads of stress.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Alex. What's the breathing, the one I came across recently, where you breathe in, so you breathe in through your nose and then you breathe in a little bit more? It's meant to be a relaxing technique, is it?
Yeah, Dr. Andrew Huberman is promoting this a lot in the States because there's been some research came out on it recently. So they call it now a physiological side. It's a double inhale and then a let go. So it looks like this. So think of like stepping up. And I've used it quite a bit actually, and I'll even go to triple and quadruple inhales on it. What it does is it will help to inflate the alveoli in the lungs, which will allow for better oxygen and blood. It's called ventilation perfusion, so allow for a better mix of oxygen and blood. It'll also allow for you to use more capacity of your lungs by stretching out those alveoli. You'll use more of them. Quite often we don't use all the capacity that we actually have in our system.
Okay. From JS here, during games in tennis on sit downs, it appears if players breathe in through their noses and out of their mouths. Would it be more efficient to breathe in and out through their noses only?
So here's the thing is, I think of breathing in through the nose, out of the mouth as a level 2 breathing. So in and out of your nose is level 1. Level 2, level 3, okay? Now, most people are naturally trained in level 2 and 3. They'll just default to it. It's been taught in sports for years. Breathe in through your nose, out of your mouth. But if you don't train level 1, you've left almost 60% of the benefits of breath training on the table, in my opinion. So if you're a trained person, I would say yes, your goal is always to restore to level 1 breathing. You want to calm your breath as quickly as you possibly can, no matter what technique you use. But sometimes you do that by stepping down the levels. So if you think I'm like, because I'm after playing like a massive rally going on 20 minutes, a breathing through my ass, right? So what you want to do is step down your level. So you go. So the goal is to restore calm breathing as quickly as you can.
That's what they're trying to do. Okay. For Frank McDonald here asks, for intense performance, e.g. marathon running, is breathing in and out through the nose the preferred option? So it's sort of the same question in a way, is it?
Well, here's the interesting thing. Intense. Marathon is not intense. It's endurance. Okay, now it feels intense, so it's important to distinguish this. I come from a strength and condition background. Intense means a percentage of your 1 rep max. It's intense is 100-meter sprinting, 60-meter sprinting. The opposite end is volume when it comes to training. So volume is the amount of something you can do. In a marathon, you're running for a very, very long time. So you need to have a huge aerobic base is what you want to train. So you want to train yourself, particularly in endurance running, you want to have excellent aerobic base and nasal breathing. That's why if you look up Emil Zatopek, he was literally he's, 70, 80 years beyond his Olympic Games. He not only pioneered interval training, he pioneered breath hold training, hypoventilation training at the time. The guy was so smart, he'd be running by people and he'd be breathing like this. That's what they called him the Czech locomotive, because you could hear him. And he'd be there by his competitor, right? And then his competitor would back off thinking, here, this guy is screwed. Like he's like, he can tell he's about to go. And then he would literally go, and on he would go, breathing perfectly. So he used to use it as a strategy to fool his competitors.
He must have learned that gamesmanship from you, did he? From an anonymous attendee, great webinar, Leo. What are your thoughts on, I'm not sure if you know Denis Shapovalov, but he does meditation in his breaks between games, and also any thoughts on McIlroy's poor run of form in the golf?
McIlroy is actually, he's one that does a Wim Hof method with his I don't know if it's ex-partner, but Caroline Wozniacki was his partner, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if she still is.
No.
But your question was, come back, sorry, that was a total sidetrack there on McIlroy.
So Denis
was
Shapovalov, he's like a top 20 young
Okay.
player, and he does meditation between games when he sits down.
Okay, fantastic. Love meditation. In fact, my route into meditation was through breath work. It's fantastic and great for the mind and great for stilling the body. It takes about, in my experience, takes 5 to 10 years to really get a hold of it and this is my experience as a coach trying to teach it to people and get support people in, and also talking to a lot of mindfulness and meditation practitioners. It takes a long time. Breath training, you're talking 6 to 12 weeks. All meditation, or a lot of it, I should say, is based on the breath. A lot of it. So that's that side. McIlroy's poor form. He puts it down to constantly changing his technique and his swing. Look, he's an innovator, and an innovator is going to he's going to have periods where he's on fire and on the money, and periods where he's absolutely awful. Let's just hope he gets it back to the Masters.
Hopefully. Great question here from Michael Figgins. One, do you recommend using one of those breathing masks that you see a lot of athletes use? You see them on Instagram, or you see them all over the place.
The traditional breathing mask was supposed to simulate high altitude, shown it doesn't do that. What it does is it puts an extra load on your system. In fact, in the days of coronavirus, one of these masks will do it too. What it does essentially is it retains carbon dioxide here in front of your mouth, which means you're rebreathing a lot of carbon dioxide. If you train yourself to nasal breathe, you will get the exact same benefits and more. Breathing masks are okay I've used them a lot for skills work, actually, for combining breath work with skills work. Okay, because the mask will fatigue the person, but it won't fatigue their overall system, if that makes sense. but it will fatigue their breathing system very, very quickly. And it's a nice way to see how you perform under pressure, which is nice. But is it a good tool for training your whole breathing system? No, train your nose. It's far tougher and far better advantages for it.
Great, thank you very much. But Cecile here is looking to check out your credentials. She wants to know who have you worked? Maybe know anybody, any stars you've worked with?
No, there's Ben Fletcher and Megan Fletcher are two judo Olympians. And I've worked very local here in Ireland in terms of elite athletes. I don't work much with elite athletes, I'll be honest with you, but mainly because there's not that many of them in Ireland. That is the truth. I've worked with a lot with James Kluski as well. And Dave here in Ireland too, who are some Irish tennis, they're now former tennis pro players. Yeah. I've worked with a couple of mountaineers who have climbed Everest and a couple of long distance sea swimmers. I work a good bit with them, and then I work with amateur Gaelic football teams quite a bit. Gaelic football is an Irish sport that is prolific here in Ireland, but nowhere else in the world, so nobody really knows of it.
Some of the fittest athletes in the world, like they're fit, the Gaelic guys.
Yeah. For amateurs, they're absolutely incredible. They really are. Like they are amateur, but they put everything into it, absolutely everything into it. They're phenomenal.
Thank you. Next, do you have any techniques for a younger under 12, a fun one, just to get them into the concept, a quick win?
Yeah. Smell. Remember, smelling is a key part to breathing. So I'll bring a lot of fun games in from that. I will do so, in other words, like smelling chocolate cake, smelling the pizza. It's a great one just to help them to relax and use how to relax. Then I will tie that into performance, as in I will look at them going on to tennis courts and getting them a sensory perception. So, what's the air like? What's the court like? Bringing that in. In terms of fun games, blowing up balloons is cool in a really good way, and actually musical instruments are a great way how to teach breathing.
Great. With a question here, I'm not sure where it's gone from. Octai, I think he's actually a Tennis Ireland fitness trainer, but he wants to know, is there any assessments that you use to quantify and to track progress over time?
The Auction Advantage will use a bolt score, used to be called a control pause. There's a colleague of mine uses another one called a CO2 tolerance test. In my opinion, they aren't they cover one dimension of breathing, but breathing covers carbon dioxide, it covers breathing mechanics, and it also covers the mind. I haven't found a test to date that will actually be accurate for measuring all three. So the way I do it is I will use a bolt score still from Auction Advantage, and I'll combine that with that breath pattern assessment that you saw there. Those two bits of information will give me almost everything I need to know for a player or a person.
Nice. And Kate wants to know here, the name of the book we mentioned at the start, so was the Auction Advantage.
The Auction Advantage, yeah. And Patrick actually, he just wrote a brand new book. If you're heavy into science and into health, focus it towards health, called The Breathing Cure. It only launched last month. But if you want one book that encapsulates for sport, I would go the Auction Advantage because it brings a lot of sport science and sporting background into it. And if it's to understand breathing as a whole and just how important it is to your system, Breath by James Nestor is a phenomenal book. Breath by James Nestor came out last year.
Great. Question I have here. We had Nick Littlehales on the podcast a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if you know Nick.
I don't know.
He's a sleep expert. He started with Manchester United, and he's worked with Ronaldo, all these Champions Leagues winning teams and a lot of Olympic athletes. But he didn't mention this in the podcast. We mentioned on the webinar he mentioned in his book about sleeping with one of those nose expander things. Is there any advantage to sleeping with one of those, the nose straps that the athletes used to use.
Yeah, which also ties into your one about the mouth taping. So the important thing to be able to do when you're sleeping is to breathe in and out through your nose. Why? Because the mouth is a stressful breathing pattern. It innervates the sympathetic nervous system a lot quicker. So if you're trying to do a practice like going to sleep, where you want the body in a completely restful state, and then you're breathing through your mouth at the same time, you actually don't get as much deep sleep rest in. So any way to help you to do that is great. Some people will mouth tape. It's been around since the 70s. You have dentists, myofunctional therapists, and a lot of trainers now are promoting it. And the point of that is, by taping your mouth, you will force yourself to nose breathe. Obviously don't do it with any alcohol or drugs.
Yeah.
But also if you're prone to anxiety, it's not a good thing. So you need to prepare things to be able to do it. Another way approach is, well, instead of doing that, if I create more space in my nostrils by breathing one of them, then that will allow more airflow in. So it's a nice way to improve that system. So I can see why he's recommending that.
Yeah, thanks for that confirmation. I have a question here from Eugene, it's the opposite of the 12-year-old question. He goes, anything to do differently for those in their 60s?
Anything to do... in your 60s, you've had a lifetime of experience behind you, and usually because of the amount of stresses in the world, your physical body is stressed. Breathing techniques is a fabulous way to build your aerobic capacity, a fabulous way to get fit without, worrying about, I can't walk, or I can't move, or I can't do this, or I can't do that. So I just find breathing techniques as a whole phenomenal for over 60s. Again, you can go one route, which is just learn to directly calm the breathing and do slower breathing techniques and breath holding. Or you can try some of the breath work, just as I say, either be with a practitioner or enter that world very gently, because it can bring up a lot of emotional stuff for you.
Okay, thank you. Question from Anthony Cannon. Leo, with breath work and training, say you're a nasal breathing, but switch to nose, mouth, it switches to the lactate system. If you switch back to the nasal, do you switch back to using the aerobic capacity, or is it gone once you change?
So that was tested in a VO2 max test, where it's a progressively tougher test. It's not, the only way you could possibly test that is with the new Pinoy equipment over in the States, where it's like a portable VO2 max, and I don't know if they give you the data. So the answer is I don't know. Those two systems, by the way, they never work independently. They work in tandem anyway. But the basis to it is that you want to have a larger aerobic system to it. By the way, for the over 60s, the picture at the very start that I had, the ripped guy up the top, was a guy called Jack LaLanne, who is the forefather of fitness. Age 70, he swam a mile carrying 70 rowboats with a person in each rowboat behind him, and he had his hands bound.
Wow.
Yeah, phenomenal. He opened the very first gym in the US and in the world. He was a forefather of fitness. You can actually see it on YouTube if you type Jack LaLanne 70th birthday.
Wow, that's impressive. What from George here, Margan? What about the time to breathe in tennis? Is it natural, or should you focus on breathing out when you hit the ball?
Okay. The point is to train specifically an area and improve your skill on it, and then integrate it and apply it in. You will generate more power on an exhale. I mean, Monica Seles, Martina Navratilova. And by the way, they were breath trained by a guy called John Douillard, fantastic doctor, way ahead. And he was actually the guy that made me think of that marathon stuff, because he had produced some research on that too. But should you be exhaling on impact, you will think, remember I said about that kinetic chain, about those links of sausages? Well, by breathing out on it, what that will do is it will actually put tension through the whole chain at the moment of impact. So it will help with impact. Now, I haven't got any research, there hasn't been any done on the difference in power production, but that's the theory of how it happens in practice.
Great, thank you. From Anonymous, are your courses one-on-one or in a group?
Those ones are programmed. The Empower Breathwork is a group. I only take 6 in it. That's the one for the mind and breath. The breath training is actually on your own. It's 16 weeks, and there's a support group to it. And then I do one-to-one coaching as well. I don't have it. I used to do a group coaching online, but it just wasn't as I wanted to give a really good quality entry product where people are like, wow, I can do this myself. Because at the end of the day, it is about you. And then I provide support within that program if you want to do upgrades.
Great. From Adi Kune, what is the difference between breathing during and between the points in tennis?
Well, breathing between points, your focus is on recovery if you need to recover. Okay, so that means you want to calm your mind and you want to calm your body, the two of them, and breathing will help you to do that within literally 2 or 3 breaths. When you have a routine. Ronaldo is amazing. You mentioned Ronaldo. He's amazing at doing that. Watch Ronaldo before he takes a free kick. Watch what he does. Then breathing during, you don't want to be focused on your breathing during. You just want it to be a natural rhythm. You want to be focused on your game, right? So whatever you do in advance, in preparation, as training, that just wants to be seamless for competition. You don't want to think about it.
Great. Just 1 or 2 questions left here from Francesca. Are there any benefits of hypopressive breathing training exercises? And does it count inside the breathwork category?
Hypopressive. I don't know what hypopressive techniques are. So she can explain that. There's hypoventilation. Maybe it means as in breath holding after the exhale, I think is what she means.
I don't know.
But ask her to explain it if she can in the next few seconds.
Great. Okay, I'll ask her that. And then from Jack Hazy, how does your breathing affect your posture?
Your diaphragm sits horizontal across here. So as I said, every kinetic chain runs through there. Your diaphragm attaches onto L1, 2, and 3 of your low back, right? So if your diaphragm is retracted in any way and you can't use it very well, well, then it alters the function of all the muscles above and below it. That's one way that it can go. Another way is if you're a reverse breather, where you're only breathing up here, that again will lead to, a reverse breather will lead to an overextension of the body, okay, and a lot of pressure on the lumbar spine as a result of that. And mouth breathing itself, it can actually, and it has done in me, it can change the whole anatomy, the structure of your jaws, the width of your airways, leads to a lot of forward head posture. And from there, with that forward head posture, can lead into very rounded posture and stooped posture. Has a huge role to play on posture.
Okay, I think that's it. Maybe there's another one from Francesca here. Benefits of alternative nostril breathing.
Okay, beautiful. There's not that much research on it. And there is one paper that I found from 2001, maybe 2002. The idea from yoga is that it will activate different parts of your nervous system. And it does, the different nostrils do have a role to play. So it's great at balancing your nervous system and bringing a bit of calm. But here's something really cool. This nostril is linked to this lung. And this nostril is linked to this lung. So if you actually, in your breath training, if you feel tightness or restriction in one side of your body, then you can block this nostril and focus your training session to bring more air and pull more air into one side, and that'll enhance the overall use of your lungs as a whole.
Okay, that is great. I'm just looking through here. Just last question here from Kate, because she asked me to repeat it. For tennis, we want to breathe in through the nose and out through the nose, ideally. Well, you've talked about that previously, that it depends. When during the breathing exercises, do you want the stomach to rise or chest?
In that assessment, they both will. They both will. At rest, but you shouldn't have to think about it. That's that. A lot of people are like, oh, is my belly rising? Is my chest? You don't need to think about it. But in that assessment, if the stomach isn't moving at all, or then that would suggest to me that the diaphragm is stiff, kind of like taking a pair of jeans out of a dryer and putting them on you. You can't really move and squat very well. Well, that's the state of your diaphragm. And to imbue good breathing mechanics, you need to be able to nasal breathe, because that will activate the diaphragm better than the mouth. And then those tissues need to be free. Whether you go to a physio or an osteo to do it, or do some breathing techniques as a means of restoring that, you can do it either way you like.
Great. And Francesca did get back to us. She says hypopressive exercise are when you breathe in normally and then release air completely until the abdomen contracts.
Okay. And she's asking, are they any good?
I think that was the question.
Yeah. So, okay. So, use a lot, and yes is the answer. One, because you're extending your exhale. Two, if you're doing a cyclical session like that, is you'll actually build up a lot of carbon dioxide, and your ability to kind of do that technique at its highest level is quite tough. Free divers will use it a lot. It's a very tough technique. It's good. And it will also teach you will feel that kinetic chain pull from your pelvic floor through the abdominals into the diaphragm all the way up to the throat, like I was talking about. You will feel that in a technique like one of those hyperpressive techniques.
Thank you, Leo. I have one more last question for you. Tiger Woods, in his book, he talks about doing deep sea diving to help regulate his breathing and how he used that on the final Sunday of Masters. Tell me, like, should tennis players be deep sea diving?
Well, that's free. Yeah, he's free diving. He's free diving. Master that. When I read that, when I originally found that out, I was like, wow, this guy is going to all lengths. Free diving is an amazing way, not only because it's a breath training that they do, but also water is amazing for calming your nervous system. That free diving, the benefits of the free diving to a land-based athlete is in particular got to do with the mind when it's under pressure, because carbon dioxide is linked to fear in your brain. So if you can deal with higher levels of carbon dioxide, you can then deal with higher levels of fear and stress and anxiety and panic. So yeah, absolutely, it's a phenomenal let's call it cross-training method.
Yeah, that was really interesting, because he's pushed himself to the boundaries. Look, they're all looking for the difference to make them that bit better, and he's gone completely to the bottom of the ocean. But thank you very much, Leo. That was very informative. I will, everybody, send around an email after this, and there'll be plenty who got onto me that couldn't make it, so there'll be a live recording will be sent around. If anybody knows anybody else who may be interested, please share it. We'll have Leo's details in there as well. And yeah, that was Leo. That was really good. That was a solid over an hour. Really interesting. You're very passionate, which is amazing. And thank you very much.
My pleasure, man. My absolute pleasure, Fabio. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Bye.